From where we sit today, it's difficult to believe that a mere 4.5 years ago I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to pre-order opening night tickets for Avengers Endgame. And I was far from the only one, but that's where we were in the summer of 2019. Marvel Studios was enjoying a run of box office success and public goodwill that's unprecedented in the history of the motion picture business and unlikely to ever be replicated at any time in the near future. But even sitting as prettily as they were, there were signs of potential trouble on the horizon. Signs that were easy enough to overlook at the time, but in retrospect, more heed probably ought to have been paid to them. I mean, sure, the scoreboard says Captain Marvel made $1 billion+ at the box office and was a bona fide hit movie, which, in a vacuum, is true. Allegedly. Because there was some stuff with that picture that felt more than a little bit fishy, but hey, maybe I am just a filthy conspiracy theorist. Maybe there's a perfectly innocent, non-corrupt explanation for why the studio and the Access media kept insisting that droves of moviegoers were packing the theaters for Captain Marvel, while actual moviegoers kept posting pictures of nearly empty auditoriums. I'm sure it's perfectly within the realm of possibility that millions upon millions of customers purchased tickets for the movie and got lost on their way to the theater. Maybe got abducted by aliens on the way to the theater. Not unlike Captain Marvel herself. The point being, well, let's call things what they are. Captain Marvel is a shitty movie. And the people who made it, they knew it was a shitty movie. But Marvel was in such a great position at that point, they could get away with one shitty movie. In fact, they could turn a shitty movie with a dumb story and a congenitally unlikable star into a $1 billion hit just by sticking it in between Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. And maybe juicing the ticket numbers just a little tiny bit. Allegedly. Here, let's put it another way. When I say Captain Marvel made $1 billion, I get the exact same feeling as I do when I say Joe Biden got 81 million votes for president. It's that little asterisk in your head that says, okay, it's a technically correct statement, but there's a strong possibility that there may be extenuating circumstances. But when you're at the tail end of a 10-year run like the one Marvel was on in 2019, you can get away with that sort of thing. And the average Marvel fan is totally willing to say, no, of course I didn't like Captain Marvel. It was a bunch of lame, shallow, girl power, girl boss, smash the patriarchy bullshit. But Marvel's done 20 pictures I really like, so I'm willing to overlook this one shitty, annoying one, which is to say the success of Captain Marvel was a case of a studio tapping into its reserves of public goodwill, putting out a picture that was nowhere near the quality of the other films in the saga because they knew those reserves were deep enough in the summer of 2019 that the fans were willing to give them a free pass. And if Captain Marvel was a one-time incident, it wouldn't have cost them anything in terms of degrading the reputation of the brand, because when you've given people a years-long run of good movies that they've really enjoyed, and you've told a story in which they've fully invested themselves, they will let you slide if you shit the bed one time. But today? Well, today is not the summer of 2019. And Captain Marvel was not a one-time incident either. Rather, it was the shape of things to come. Marvel has released a hell of a lot of content in the intervening 4.5 years. None of it particularly good. Most of it rather insufferably awful. But where will future historians place the company's nadir, its rock bottom, the moment the studio finished pissing away all that credibility and fan goodwill? Well, they might say it was this week. And the irony likely won't escape them that the second Captain Marvel picture, which actually isn't a Captain Marvel picture since she got demoted in her own sequel, but that's a whole other thing, finished the job that the first Captain Marvel picture had begun. And after this week, the question never needs to be asked again. Do movie audiences want to see strong, powerful superheroines of color fighting strong, powerful female supervillains of color? No, they do not. It almost seems like the movie-going public really, really preferred it when the main heroes in the MCU were a bunch of toxic white male heterosexuals, which I guess means the audience are just a bunch of damned filthy bigots. But the news isn't all that bad for the Marvels, as the new picture is called. It's just mostly bad. When you're the studio and the Access media, No matter the totality with which your narrative has crashed and burned already, you still, in duty bound, you have to show up the next day, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and get to work slathering the damn lipstick on the damn pig. This picture just opened to 46 million domestic, 110 million worldwide. So there's a lot of pig and not that much lipstick, is all I'm saying. In fact, they were only able to come up with one thing. They said, best opening weekend ever for a film with a black female director. So suck on that, bigots. But there's another thing they seem to have overlooked completely, which really surprises me. In fact, there's a whole other intersectional angle they could have pursued and didn't, because if I'm not mistaken, the Marvels also just had the best opening ever for a picture with a disabled lead. Brie Larson, who got the double whammy from the Fate machine when she was sadly born without a personality and without an ass. But did she allow herself to be defined by her disadvantage? Oh no, not my assless wonder. She put her head down and got right to work, smashing those glass ceilings and taking on that evil patriarchy. In fact, if it wasn't for Brie Larson and the very important humanitarian work that she does, I would have no idea that 65% of movie critics are white males over 40. Wait, yes I would, because that seems like a perfectly reasonable percentage that I might have been able to guess. Never mind! The point is, next time you sit on the toilet, thank your lucky stars that you weren't born with a congenital defect like the one from which Brie Larson suffers. For you and me, it's something we never think twice about. For a person who suffers from an incurable case of gluteosa absentia, like our good friend Ms. Larson, she has to take all manner of precautions, or else she will miss the seat entirely and drop straight into the bowl. And what's more, her trenchant refusal to wear a prosthetic ass, it is both brave and inspiring. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I was remiss just now in not reading out the URL for Brie Larson's favorite charity, the American Society for Sisters Without Asses or Tits, you can find them at asshat.org. That's asshat.org. Operators are standing by. Together we can find the cure. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. Now, if the YouTube analytics are to be believed, 0.8% of this program's viewers hail from the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And it's to that 0.8% that I want to address, in good faith and all conviviality, the following 5-word question. Dude, what the actual fuck? And yes, before I even begin, I know we Yanks don't have a hell of a lot of leeway to be casting aspersions upon the peoples of other nations at this stage of the game. But we do have some, and the host intends to use up all of it, starting right now. As severe as our issues are over here, as often as we see and hear things that might have seemed inconceivable 5 or 7 or 10 years ago, you guys are well and truly outshining us in terms of the place of total stark raving madness that your society has gone to just recently, and I have 2 main points of emphasis for the purposes of this segment. The first of which is, you just allowed upwards of 300,000 terrorism fans to maraud through your capital city on Armistice Day. I say again, Armistice Day. For over 100 years, that's the most sacred, most solemn date on the whole British calendar. We saw monuments desecrated, cops assaulted, citizens beaten, horses robbed, women rustled, and cattle raped. Oh, and for the cherry on top, a member of the cabinet was nearly lynched by an angry mob of representatives from the religion of peace. And the second thing is, if you want to call yourself an enlightened liberal democracy, how shall I put this? Maybe don't execute babies. And I don't think I'm outside my ethical responsibilities in describing it thusly. The fact pattern says only one thing here. The British government executed one of its own citizens, a little girl named Indy Gregory, 8 months of age. And my God, if this story doesn't cause you to think, as it does me, that we urgently need a new adjective that's much stronger than Orwellian, then I'm not sure what will. Moreover, anybody who looks at a story like this and fails to register that there are very real and perfectly valid objections to the whole idea of nationalized medical care, that there is a hell of a slippery slope of socialized medicine where you always wind up one way or the other, namely care rationing and death panels, or some version of it, well, such people can't be helped, frankly, and you're best served not wasting your time on them. It would be one thing if they had said to the patients, or to the parents, pardon me, Mr. Gregory, Miss Staniforth, it's the considered opinion of the National Health Service that your daughter is mortally and intractably ill. No further treatment should be given at public expense. Period, full stop. It is sick and evil and heartless and depraved, to be sure, obviously. But from the cold, callous, bureaucratic perspective, it at least is a defensible position. But that's not what they said to these folks. They took it to a crueler, more evil, more callous, more dark-hearted place altogether. They said, not only are we going to discontinue life-extending treatment for your child, but we are also going to make damn good ensure she dies. The government of Italy conferred emergency citizenship on little baby Indy. Pope woke Frank I, credit where it's due, offered to admit her at no expense to the ICU in the Vatican Hospital. He sent one of the Holy See's private jets up to London to bring her and her parents back to Rome. Now, let's stop right here and ask a crucially important question. What possible reason does the British government have at this point in the story to prevent these parents from taking their baby to a hospital in Italy? Because I can think of no explanation save for sheer callousness and cruelty. But that's exactly what they did. Oh, but it gets worse still. Not only did they say you and your daughter are forbidden to leave the country, but they also, and this just makes me want to punch something. I swear to God, they said, you may not remove her from this hospital. You may not take her home to die in her own room in her own house in the presence of her own family. Why? Because if we let you walk out of this hospital with that baby, you might start getting ideas about fleeing the country, trying to go get her some medical treatment. We just can't have that. Frankly, I think the two of you need to stop being so damn difficult. You can be on your merry way just as soon as I am satisfied that that little girl is stone dead. So in the Great Britain of 2023, and it almost seems awkward to keep calling it Great Britain, seems like they should downgrade it to fair to middling Britain or some shit. You know, since national self-loathing seems to be their defining characteristic now, but in the Britain of 2023, there are certain offenses that the authorities will not tolerate. Things you shouldn't even consider doing unless you are well and truly prepared for a trip down to the pokey. Like smuggling your infant daughter out of the country for unauthorized medical treatment, or, as we found out on Armistice Day, waving your own country's flag in the streets of your own capital city? Why, yes, damn it, it's about time you people woke up and smelled the post-colonial coffee, which I'm sure has soy milk in it. Because the fact of the matter is, if you're a white Englishman waving a Union Jack in London, or worse yet, a St. George Cross, that could potentially be seen as an offensively racist act by people who think cutting the heads off of babies is a fun leisure activity. Come on, sir! We shouldn't have to explain all this. It's a matter of basic public morality, don't you know? Let's roll up that flag. Let's be respectful toward the terrorists and their culture. I better not see any more racist behavior out of you lot, thinking you can just wave British flags on Armistice Day when there's a terrorist march going on. You fuckers and your white privilege. God, it never ends. I'm going to have my eye on you for the rest of the day, and if I hear about any problematic conduct, if I hear you misgendered somebody or engaged in any sort of patriotic chanting, you and your gang of knuckle-dragging hooligans are all going to the station. And if you're thinking I must be exaggerating all this, first of all, no, I am not. And second of all, just wait, because it gets much worse. Oh, so much worse. Would you believe 80 law-abiding British subjects were preemptively arrested and detained on the possibility that they might engage in unauthorized speech when they arrived in London, because that apparently is a thing that happens in Great Britain now. Isn't that lovely? They arrest people for potential future wrong think and wrong speak. Now, we knew you lot were up to no good when you showed up in the city with your white skin and your British flags and your patriotic slogans. I can recognize a racist conspiracy when I see one, by God. Meanwhile, did you see some of the signs and flags that were being waved by the Hamas huggers? Look, I ain't no fancy law enforcement professional. I ain't got no fancy book learning, so clearly this stuff is all well beyond my intellectual station. I just wish I had enough highfalutin college degrees to understand why the Union Jack is a divisive hate symbol and a Star of David with a freaking swastika in the middle Well, that's just a good bit of protected political speech. Mostly peaceful protest, I believe they call it. We may have to downgrade it to moderately peaceful protest later on, depending on how big the flames get. You know how these things are. And it would be bad enough, humiliating enough, if this had all gone down on any old Sunday of the year. But that it was allowed to occur on Armistice Day, Remembrance Day, that the woke rage mob is so much in charge of events that they can simply do whatever they want, whenever they want, on any day of their choosing, depending on how much scorn and humiliation they wish to inflict on the country in which they live. Meanwhile, can I get somebody to tell me what their actual objective is here? Free Palestine from the river to the sea, all that horse shit. They like to feign ignorance and tell us, oh, no, it doesn't mean we want to destroy Israel. Okay, pal. But they're even more assiduous about never stating what their desired end game is. What does free Palestine look like exactly? How is from the river to the sea to be achieved while maintaining Israel's territorial integrity? Who is to govern the Palestinian state? If we had a functioning news media, we might depend upon them to ask such questions, but alas, we do not. But finally, and most importantly, how many people in the Free Palestine crowd do you imagine are aware of the fact that the name Palestine was coined by a British colonial administrator in 1917? Also, in times like these, I think it's instructive occasionally for those of us who have no particular dog in the religion race to bring things back to first principles and remind everybody else that this whole issue, just as it has for nearly a millennium and a half, deals solely with which group of people gets to pray on top of a certain little hill. But it has to be pointed out, especially when you hear fake news performance artists saying ridiculous things like how the Temple Mount is an area traditionally reserved for Muslims, that the Jews were worshipping on that site 13 centuries before the birth of Muhammad. Just saying. And maybe I've committed an Islamophobic hate crime by uttering that last sentence. Who knows? In any event, thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. Until next time, fair winds and following seas. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.